We are drifting into a dystopian nightmare. In the wake of the recent riots, a wave of concern has swept through our society, not just about the violence itself, but about the direction our response to it might take. We stand now, I think, probably at a crossroads, one path leading towards justice and reconciliation, the other towards a future dominated by surveillance and digital control. At least we stand at a junction, two roads. And as we contemplate our next step, we need to reflect on the broader implications of the measures being proposed and the measures available. The images from the riots will have seared the thoughts of the rioters as well as the young children who were killed into our memory. Acts of violence and hatred such as those following the Stockport stabbings must have shocked the nation. And the response naturally has been one of condemnation and a demand for justice. However, the tools being considered to maintain order, such as the increased use of facial recognition technology, pose dangers to our civil liberties. Facial recognition technology is no longer an Orwellian fantasy. It's a present reality, and Sir Keir Starmer's recent commitment to expand the use of this technology across the UK reflects a worrying trend. While Londoners might be somewhat familiar with the technology due to the experimental use by the Metropolitan Police, the broader implications of its widespread adoption are perhaps alarming. Consider this. Facial recognition technology, as it stands, is far from perfect, with a reported 74% misidentification rate. The potential for error and abuse is enormous. Moreover, the deployment of such technology at transport hubs or public gatherings means that millions of innocent people could be subject to constant unconsented surveillance, turning our very identities into barcodes, scanned and mirrored at will. It's a step towards a society where the presumption of innocence is eroded by the pervasive digital oversight of machines. There was a photograph yesterday that came out of a crowd greeting Kamala Harris at an airport, and the speculation was, is this a digital photograph? And AI can produce digital photographs, very convincing digital photographs, but essentially they are machine dominated. And you will find in a digital photograph errors where characters have 2 fingers or 6 fingers, or characters' faces are not quite human, because these are pictures invented by a machine. Humanity is not at the top of their forethought. And I think that's quite telling. Can a machine lie? Of course it can. A machine will do whatever you tell it to do. To understand the potential trajectory of Keir Starmer's policies, we only need to look at the examples set by other nations, by China, where the integration of facial recognition is everyday life, is what people would expect. It's extensive. The government employs it not only for policing, but also as part of its broader social credit system, where citizens' behaviours are monitored and scored. The system effectively controls and suppresses dissent by making participation in society contingent on good behaviour, as defined by the state. Similarly, Russia has made aggressive use of digital surveillance to maintain control. The Russian state employs a vast array of tools, from monitoring social media to hacking opposition communications, to erasing the social media that it doesn't want, and not actually providing an alternative. No, well, not an alternative that works. Even even those people who try and use a VPN in Russia are now failing. Russia is there to silence dissent, to maintain its grip on power. A lack of transparency and accountability in these systems has resulted in widespread abuse of human rights, with little recourse for those affected. The examples of China and Russia serve as stark warnings. The tools we are considering today, facial recognition, AI-driven surveillance, expensive data collection, expansive data collection, are the very same tools used by authoritarian regimes to suppress freedoms and control populations. The questions we must ask ourselves are whether this is a path that we wish to continue following. The decision has been taken, but do we actually want to go? The danger is not only that these technologies could be used to suppress violent thugs, as of course proponents argue. History shows that once the tools are deployed, they're inevitably something that expands, something that develops. The Met Police's use of facial recognition at Notting Hill Carnival, where thousands of innocent people were scanned for the sake of one arrest, is a troubling precedent. Even peaceful protests like the anti-arms fair have been targeted, not for criminality but for identifying people of interest. If the legacy of these riots is the normalisation of intrusive surveillance across the UK, then we risk sacrificing our democratic values at the altar of security. We must remember that free speech and the right to privacy are foundational to our society and to the future of our society. They're not luxuries to be discarded in times of crisis, but rights to be fiercely protected. This is the crisis. The crisis is a decision. If you go back to the original word anyway, you go back to the Greek. Krisis is a decision. You make a decision. And this is our decision. The path forward is fraught with peril. On the one hand, there's the lure of security achieved through surveillance and control. On the other, there's the challenge of addressing the root causes of violence and division in our society without compromising our values. Sami Chakrabarty's new book, Human Rights, The Case for the Defence, offers an essential guide for these troubled times. As she eloquently argues, the protection of human rights is more crucial now than ever. The temptation to sacrifice our rights for security is strong, but maybe we should resist it. The costs of giving in are too high. The digital dystopia that awaits us, where our every move is monitored, our every word potentially censored, is not the future we should choose. We've been there with ID cards. This is worse. Instead, we must focus on justice and rehabilitation, as Lord Kenneth Clarke suggested in response to the riots. Punishment alone will not solve the problem. We must also work to ensure rehabilitation, that those who have committed crimes do not reoffend, not simply by being locked up, but by being changed, by being fundamentally changed. And there was a story yesterday, I think, of 15-year-olds and 12-year-olds who have been brainwashed into this right-wing thinking. We need to defy that. We need to use education to help people think, not necessarily to think in unison, in fact, not to think in unison, to debate, to question, but not to be plugged into this mindless sloganizing. We require a justice system that is both fair and effective, not one that relies on fear and control. We need to respond to the unrest. We need to be guided by the values that we have rather than install new ones and indeed be motivated by fear. The expansion of digital surveillance may seem a quick fix, but the fact that it was promoted in the first place by Nadine Dorries should make you pause and question whether or not it's the right thing to do. It carries with it the seeds of a future that we are giving away, and we should be wary of it, a future where our rights are eroded under the guise of security. We need to learn from China and from Russia. We need to choose a different path. Because you can't suppress everything with surveillance. And in the end, you're not providing security with surveillance. You're just providing suppression, and an inadequate suppression at that. we need to uphold our democratic traditions, or rather not our democratic traditions, we need to uphold our traditions of freedom. That's what Magna Carta was all about. We need to enshrine in our response the idea that violence is wrong, justice is measured and rooted in respect for human rights and respect for freedom and respect for personal dignity.